This is Hello Brain, presented by Brainovation Network. Welcome back to Hello Brain. I'm your host, Collin Adams. I've got Dr. Ramona Von Leden here with me, and today we've got another special guest joining, Alex Doman. Alex is the founder and CEO of Advanced Brain Technologies and a pioneer in the use of personalized sound and music to support brain health, regulation, and performance through tools like the Listening Program. Alex, welcome. Really excited to have you on today.
Collin, great to be here with you and Ramona. Thanks so much.
Yeah, super pumped for this.
So when people hear that you're using sound and music as a tool for the brain, it might be surprising. It might actually be exciting for some people because everyone loves music. How do you help someone understand what sound is actually doing in the brain and nervous system?
So we're starting with the easy questions. I love it. So if we think about it, one of the first senses to develop in utero is our sensation of sound. It's one of our first connections to our external world. So from 16 to 20 weeks in utero, the fetus is processing the sound of the womb in mother's voice and feeling the rhythm of the environment. So sound and movement integration is one of the first steps of early child brain development. So we're wired for sound. We understand if we're safe in an environment based on the sounds that we perceive. We're always assessing 24/7, 365. We're processing sound. We don't have earlids, we have eyelids. We can shut down part of the visual system, but not the auditory system. And so it is primary to our survival. It's primary to our communication, interaction with each other, and understanding the environment that we're in. So it's only natural that we would use this system being so foundational to our neurology to activate and train it and optimize it.
That's a great answer. And I actually did not even know that about our first sensory experience in the womb. So I actually got chills as you were talking. That's really cool to learn.
Yeah, it's cool when we think about it, and it also ties to that idea of the integration of sound and movement, right? So what's happening in the cochlear and the vestibular system in utero is just so foundational to our overall development and how we perceive and interact with the world. How we act on the world through movement and how we perceive the world and respond to it based on sound and voice.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Alex. I think, with the brainstem being one of the first parts of the nervous system in the brain that develops, again, as you said, that's your more autonomic regulation systems, your arousal and survival systems. So how it interacts with sound becomes such literally an integral part of your system without you even realizing it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because sound is a trigger that can set off the fight or flight response, a sympathetic response in the autonomic nervous system. At the same time, it's also the antidote to help train that system and to de-escalate over arousal and go into our parasympathetic state. So it can both be a trigger, but it's also a tool for recovery and training.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think with the limbic system, with everything that's tied to emotion and memory, there's this like emotional tag of sound where, we hear a sound, we hear things and it brings up memories for us, right? We've had that experience, almost everyone has. And it's probably why, things like a song or certain types of music can make you feel a different kind of way because you have those memories tied into those rhythms and those patterns that you've come to recognize over time.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really, really part of that element of being a human, right?
I remember last year in the fall, I was at a San Francisco Giants baseball game out here, and Justin Verlander was the starting pitcher who, for those of you who don't know, is a Hall of Fame level pitcher. But I grew up in Michigan as a Detroit Tigers fan, and he was like the hallmark player for my entire childhood. And for that entire time, he had the same walkout song every time he took the mound. And it's Till I Collapse by Eminem. So it's a Detroit classic. We always in Detroit got to stick with Eminem. And I remember I was just at the game, just kind of looking around, looking at the fans, looking at the big screen, and then all of a sudden that song came on, and it felt like I was just back in my middle school self again. Like I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I was like, this is incredible. Like this is little boyhood Collin again coming out just from hearing this song.
Well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned your adolescence, Colin, because so much of our identity is shaped by the sound of our youth, right? And it stays in us. I mean, for me, I was in the punk rock scene and in Southern California, and that was still in me today in my late 50s. And it's just a connection that brings you back to the time when you're shaping identity, right? And the music that is part of our culture, that's part of our generation and part of our peer group is so affirming to shaping who we are that, yeah, the recall and the connection to it's highly emotional.
Yeah, I think it's funny how then as you get older and people think about oldies and like the things that we, some people get stuck on what they listened to in high school because you do have that tie so much to like the person that you wanted to be, that you were developing, that you were learning about in that time period. And it's always going to be, yeah, same Alex as you. I was a punk rock kid as well, Northern California. So, but we had a lot of crossover there. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I just want to get in the car, roll down the windows and like blast some Phoenix TX. And it just like, it can make my day better, all better.
Well, it never leaves us, and you'll appreciate this. I remember the second time I saw Social Distortion, I was underage. They were playing at Safari Sands in Huntington Beach where I lived, and I just stood at the back door, right, just to hear them. Full circle, 40 years later, they're playing here in Salt Lake City in September, and I get to take my family. And they're still going like with a new album. So it's awesome to see a lot of these bands keep charging hard too.
And I wonder, music has such a profound impact on the nervous system. I am curious, Alex, on your thoughts, because obviously you've built your career and a lot of the tools that you work with around what sound can do for the nervous system. I remember us, like with people who have disabilities and are getting older, who are musicians, it's like you see them and they'll be in a wheelchair, and then like they get up on stage, grab their instrument and they start playing, and it's like an entirely different person like comes to life. It's like it turns on all of these patterns in our body that are there, but they're dormant when we're not sort of accessing them through sounds. And I think there's a lot for like flow state, like you get into a flow state listening to music, dance, rhythms that like our body pairs to the music and it feels good in our body. So I mean, one thing that I definitely came into this conversation wanting to ask you about was kind of where that inspiration came for you to really make this, make Advanced Brain what it is, and build out these programs based around sound and music, and what experience you had that kind of like led to that idea.
Yeah, so it's multifaceted, Ramona, and it's really because of my family. So my family's been in the field of neurorehabilitation for 3 generations, 80 years, starting with my grandfather that was a physical medicine rehab physician. Carrying on with my father, they both taught me, and sound and music were always part of their protocols for brain training. So I was raised in it, but then I also had an interesting challenge. I would have been diagnosed with an auditory processing disorder. I was overly sensitive to sound. I developed tinnitus as a teenager due to a noise-induced trauma at a punk show. So I actually had an auditory issue that arose when I was 17. So I had this connection to sound that was very new, in that I had to rehabilitate my own auditory system, and I hadn't really recognized that. So I was working with my father at the National Association for Child Development, training in methods of sound therapy and listening therapy from Europe, using them with his population of kids with special needs that he serves. And through using different methods, I was experimenting on myself, finding what worked, what didn't work. And through that, we found that we needed to create something new and something different. So really, we were working for a solution that was an affordable, enjoyable, effective, home-based solution that families could actually do and make impact on their kids. So that led to the creation of the listening program, and that was in the late 90s.
Wow.
Amazing. I had no idea that it was like this is the family business.
Oh yeah, it's and still going. So it's a family's life mission, and I feel very blessed to have been born into the Doman family and to have this be the journey.
I'm really glad you asked that question, Ramona, because it just leads perfectly into the next topic of our conversation. How would you best describe, Alex, what the listening program is and what it was originally designed to do?
The listening program is a music-based listening therapy that is designed to improve how the brain processes auditory information. So it uses original recordings and arrangements of both classical and world rhythmic music that are designed into a architecture based around sound frequency that trains the brain to better process every sound frequency it's capable of processing, from low tones at 20 hertz to the highest frequencies at 20,000 hertz. So you listen for 15-minute sessions with a listening program, 9-minute sessions with the in-time method, and you do that 5 days a week on, 2 days off, and it is improving your sensory processing. We started to focus on the improvement of auditory processing, how the brain responds to its environment, processes in response to sound. And what we learned through training auditory processing is that we're going back to something that Ramona touched on, is we're actually impacting the autonomic nervous system and the limbic system and the emotional brain. So this mind-body connection and grounding and self-regulation all folded into it. So it's primarily used for individuals that have some neurological need, some sensory processing need that they're looking to improve. So, from an extreme end, a child with autism that's so sound sensitive, they actually can't leave the house, to a parent that's so stressed from helping their child and trying to serve and meet their needs and grow to their potential that they need a tool for self-regulation. So we're working at both ends of the spectrum.
That's incredible. And you explained that it's 15 minutes or the 9 minutes, it's 5 days a week with 2 days off. If someone were to start going through the listening program, or even the other one, what was the name of the other one?
In Time
program, what does it actually look like in the training?
So it's very complex. You put on some headphones, you press play, either with our mobile app or on a portable media player with your personalized music library, and you do something you enjoy while the headphones are on. You color, you meditate, you relax, you just take that time as your personal oasis. Start your day with it, bookend at the end. You have the option of 2 sessions a day depending on your protocol. But what it looks like is simply you're listening with headphones, taking time for yourself and that quiet respite away from everything else that's happening, and you just allow the music to do the work. There's no output, there's no test, there's no interaction that you have to do. You don't have to have a special skill level. Just put on the headphones, press play, enjoy the music.
So I am curious about that. So you're saying you put the headphones on and you can do it while you're doing other things. What do we see sort of, because I know Collin's from this background as well as the neurofeedback side of things, like what are we seeing that is essentially going on in the background? It is happening in that autonomic system, that even though maybe I'm like cutting up vegetables for dinner, like in the back of my mind, what's happening here?
Well, we're working at a couple different levels, right? So if we can be present and engaged in active listening with it, that's ideal, right? So that we're present with the sound. I mean, it's incredibly dynamic, right? So we have sound moving through the hemispheres in spatial surround. So the sound, the instruments are literally moving in space and we're tracking them. So we can very consciously engage in it, Or if we're not at a cognitive level that we can do that, then we'll just have somebody engaged in a quiet activity that they enjoy. Quiet activity might be arts and crafts, quiet toys, nothing cognitively engaging. But what's happening in the background is the music is imprinting on the brain, right? So this is a form of sensory stimulation. And we're getting this full range of sound frequency that the brain is processing that has a number of components to it. So it has a temporal time component. So we're understanding time through the signature of the music, through the tempo of the music. We're understanding volume dynamics through dynamic volume changes that are happening within it. We're understanding where our body is in physical space based on the spatial dimension of what's happening with the sound, then the various sound frequencies that are playing. So we're working different areas of our neural network in response to that sound. So we're coming, as you know, Ramona, primarily to the auditory cortices, but we know that we have associated brain areas that are processing music that are affecting the whole system at some level. So from the bottom up and the top down. So you're getting this whole neurological engagement just simply with the presence of the headphones and the music.
Yeah, I think for one thing that's very interesting to me, of course, as I kind of mentioned when I talked about how dance and the flow state with the body is the cerebellum and sort of are the parts of our brains that are literally working on coordination. When you give it a rhythm to work with, it uses that to help organize itself so that it can stabilize some of that timing, right? I have a question for you. This is silly, but I've got a few friends in my life who they just have no rhythm and they've never been able to, would something like this help them to build that rhythm?
Oh, absolutely. And especially the In Time program, because that's part of the intention.
That's so cool.
I mean, it's literally Nacho Aramani, who partnered with us as our composer and our artist. He's a multi-instrumentalist, flamenco percussionist, just absolutely amazing composer and artist. We worked for 2 years to compose the music for that In Time program, to bring in different rhythms from different elements in the world, different instrumentation, and you listen for 9 minutes. Then after you listen, you have the option to do body percussion to then integrate those rhythms that your brain has just learned how to process. And then there's a therapeutic drum. In that therapeutic drum, you can then engage in drumming activities. So there's a whole active component. So for people that are the rhythmically challenged on the dance floor, 2 left feet, In Time is absolutely incredible to train that sense of rhythm and timing and to understand that in relation to movement. It's been phenomenal as a neuro rehab tool, but also just to help those of us that are maybe a little challenged on the dance floor.
That's so cool. Yeah, it's kind of a silly story, but so I've taught fitness of some kind for about 10 years. And one thing I used to teach was kickboxing, and we would teach it to the beat, which I think in a lot of fitness classes you teach on the beat, whether it's dance or spin or kickboxing, which again, it helps you to coordinate the movements. It's okay, you know when you're supposed to move this body part, when you're supposed to do this thing. But funny enough, the woman who owned the studio, the kickboxing studio I taught at, had no rhythm, and she wanted so badly to teach, and she would she couldn't hear it. She just could not hear the beat. And I always was you just keep doing it and eventually it's going to kick in for you. And she's it just never did. So man, that would have been the thing, right? Get her some in-time training.
Yeah. You just got to meet people where they're at, right? And just kind of find their level and begin training in there and work their way up.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I grew up, I'm going to guess, and maybe I'm totally wrong, but based on the background of your family, I grew up playing instruments and, always, whether or not I was going to be a musician, in my adulthood, it was more about knowing that what impact the music had on that music and learning a musical instrument had on the brain. And I think obviously we've always thought of it as it's learning another language, right? Which just like learning any language, you know where I'm going, Collin. I'm gonna give it a shout out. Is super good for neuroplasticity. Shout out Duolingo. We do that at least once an episode. but I'm curious if you would be able to expand a little bit on, do you think there are things about music itself that are a little bit different from like learning another language, that build a different kind of, because usually it was like kids who played instruments had better test scores. They had, this higher level of cognitive ability, that the only, they were learning a second language like everyone in school, but they were also playing an instrument.
Yeah, it's interesting. So early on in the work, my grandfather, great uncle, worked with Dr. Suzuki, and to help introduce Suzuki method into the United States as part of the protocols. And there is this like direct correlation with kids that had the most organized movement patterns, who were learning an instrument, who then had a better ability to learn second language as well, because they were doing accelerated early child development programs. And they found that adding in the learning of the instrument just trained so many brain areas. So there's a motor component, right? There's an auditory component. We have rhythm, we have timing. So there's high correlation with math achievement, as we know, with complex reasoning and complex thinking. In fact, I think this brings me to a young woman that my father worked with for over 20 years. Her name was Jennifer Lindsay. And when Jennifer was born, she had oxygen deprivation. She had hypoxia. She had an APGAR score of 1. So on a scale of 0 dead to 10 healthy baby, she was a 1, and she was a brain injured kid. And the fortune tellers were saying, the life that Jennifer's going to lead is going to be less than optimal at every level. This girl speaks, reads, writes in over 5 languages. She can play chess without a chessboard. Is been a concert opera singer, first chair violinist. You go down the line, and one of the biggest components was her musical ability. And training with early violin was such an important aspect of her own neuro rehab that she just became this absolutely gifted individual at everything she touched.
That's an incredible story. Oh my gosh.
No kidding.
She's
Wow.
amazing. She's amazing.
Holy crap.
My parents had me and my sister both do instruments because they, without necessarily knowing everything that you guys just shared, were like, yeah, somehow like your brain will be better. And so I grew up playing different things, and looking back, wish I would have really developed that even more, because music has this ability, even still, to reach such a deep part of the brain, and my brain in particular. Every time we're about to do another podcast recording, I sit for 15 minutes and listen to some of my favorite songs, because for the reason we've been talking about, it just helps me lock in a lot more than anything else does. And it's funny, the timing of this, the question of the day inside of our Brainovation digital platform that we have was, which sensory experience has the most immediate effect on your mood and clarity? And one of the answers, and the answer that I gave, was sound. And whether it's music or nature sounds or even silence, the sound of silence can be very powerful. And so I just, continue to resonate with this conversation and how powerful music and sound can be.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Colin. I think, as you said, we have so many sounds around us that we're taking in and we don't even realize that we're taking in. I like to tell that my other shout out that I must do every episode is to my dog, Mr. Peter. He did a little bark earlier, but dogs for the most part are pretty quiet. But when he's not in the house, like if I'm out of town and I've left him at my mom's and then I come home for the night and haven't picked him up yet, it's so quiet. And I'm like, he didn't even make that much noise. But those little bits that you hear that you don't even realize you're hearing at all times, and the things that might make a space feel safe versus unsafe, right? Like the tingles you get on your spine. A lot of times that's an auditory sound that you're hearing. It's not something you see. You might be out walking at night. There's nothing to see, but you hear something and ooh, that's not a sound that feels good to me. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it is. If you think about it, like when you're sleeping, if we just think about just basic survival, your brain has to monitor your environment. So the little things that are the triggers that say, this doesn't fit the picture of the environment, that's the warning. It's the footstep that breaks the branch that's laying on the ground. And, based on the distance, the timing, the intensity, how that sound reached the brain, which ear it hit first versus the second, we're detecting immediately, are we safe?
Right.
And what is that? Am I going to, am I safe? Am I going to fight this thing? Am I going to run from it? So we're still wired for that. So it is just part of our survival instinct.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's people who live in a city versus who live in, a rural area, or people who live someplace quiet versus loud. Like, again, it's the things, Colin was talking, he uses a white noise machine at night to sleep, things like that to help even out what you're taking in. But I think I know it myself. I live in Austin. I live pretty close to downtown. Austin's a fairly quiet city by and large. But my mom and I own this ranch about an hour away. And when I go out there, I mean, the difference in I'll look at my sleep patterns the next day and it's like this beautiful, perfect sleep pattern when I'm out there versus here, I'm getting good sleep, but there's a few more disruptions. And it's definitely those inputs that are just from being in a noisier environment for sure.
Yeah. And I bet, Ramona, that if you're looking at your HRV is better when you're out at the ranch.
Probably. It's a pretty special place.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Alex, with your program. So if somebody were to start using one of these, what have you heard from people about how soon they feel a change or see a difference? Is this something that, I think these are brain training like this can probably be something that becomes a long-term habit and a good one. But for somebody who's trying to seek this out to help with something, what would they see? When would they start to see a difference?
Yeah, so as with everything, it's so personal, right? It's so individual depending on where we're at and where our needs are. The first time somebody listens, they're going to experience something. They're going to have a feeling. They're going to just make a decision about how this feels, and does this feel right for my nervous system? And if it does, they're going to feel calmer. They're going to feel a calmer state, and get into that state of homeostasis. So the first week, you're going to find a calm, you're going to find a grounding once we've kind of figured this thing out and understood what it was. And we'll tend to see this evolution over days and weeks. The initial course of the listening program, they're called cycles. It's 25 hours of brain training. So in that cycle, and through that, we do a complete arc of training every brain frequency the brain can perceive, with every session that we're doing, one built upon the session before it. So these are building blocks that we're moving through. And we get different breakthroughs at different stages because we begin in low frequency sounds that ground the sensory motor system. So we're starting with grounding, getting safety, getting sensory motor organization, which is the first step of child development. So we have a neurodevelopmental model. We start in the body, then we move to communication. So we go from low frequencies to the mid frequency range where we receive and process language. And as we're communicating today, then once we've organized that area, we go to the higher frequencies more correlated with executive function. So we go to higher brain states. So we're moving up from brainstem to cortex, and then back down in the protocol. So we have different experiences as we move through this process. Some people experience breakthroughs and changes much faster than others. But typically we're going to expect some change in a session just exponentially, but begin to see functional changes are going to happen over weeks to months that are really, really meaningful. Our client is not the client says, well, I'm just going to try this thing a few times and see if it works for me. We know that that's not how the brain works. Neuroplasticity needs the right frequency, intensity, and duration, and a commitment to a program that's going to make meaningful change. And that does take some work. And the work is the repetitions. Putting on the headphones, pressing play.
Yeah. I think of it, like you said, 25 hours. The thought that came to my mind was when I would start a sports season, and Colin, of course, you'll very feel this, is the 3 weeks before you start real, the conditioning weeks. where it's like, all right, you got to get your body back into shape. And it's the worst 3 weeks. I mean, in this case, I'm not saying this would be a bad experience, but it's like hard. It's like you're going through building those patterns back up. And after 3 weeks, you start to be like, oh, okay, things are moving again. I feel comfortable. I'm like locked in. And so I feel like when you say 25 hours to me, it sounds like that it's like your conditioning weeks.
Yeah, and you're building the foundation. We have practitioners with clients that have been on the program 20 years. And why? Because we're a different person every day. So it's a matter of what are our initial needs and goals, and we reach them, and how does this program help facilitate unlocking that next level? So it's something that can live with us. People are meeting a need, trying to solve a challenge. That can happen in the initial protocol. But then we're building from there because we're a different person at that stage. So
Really
again,
glad you said that.
evolve.
Yeah, because my question to follow that up is, you said this, we're a different person every day. The brain can fluctuate a lot based on how you sleep, what you ate, if you've been exercising or not, all the foundational basic things. Does the training account for that as someone's going through a protocol to say like, man, this day in neurofeedback, like you'll have a session where maybe your brain was just on fire and maybe you had some caffeine, so everything really went well, you're getting a lot of positive feedback, and then the next day you slept 2 hours and you got in an argument with your spouse, and then you do your session and you can't get any positive reinforcement. Several neurofeedback devices that I'm aware of have built-in systems to account for daily brain states, and I'm curious to know how you guys approach that.
Yeah, so with the listening program, since we don't have that EEG monitoring happening, it's not accommodating to you. You're going through the protocol, and because you're putting in the repetitions, you're going to have days that are on and days that are off. If we think about Vital Neuro, which is the real-time responsive music, then that's a whole different story. With Vital Neuro, you're putting on the headphones, listening to the music, and it's personalized to you, not just session by session, moment by moment. So it's adapting to your state to help you realize that ideal state that you've targeted for that training session. So very, very highly neuroadaptive.
Love that. And it's it's kind of like with the athlete, the training cycle. You're going to have days where you're really feeling it and doing well, and other days where you're not as good. But the key there, like you've said several times, is just committing to the process, the consistency of it. I have 10 years doing neurofeedback on myself and with others. And the thing that I always say to practitioners that I talk to who are working on neurofeedback, and then even to clients I've worked with, is neurofeedback only works if you do neurofeedback. If you don't do your sessions, it's not going to do anything for you. And so, like you said, the person who's like, yeah, I'm just going to feel this out and see if it's the right thing for me, will probably leave disappointed, because that's not the kind of commitment that it takes to really thrive and do well on a program like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I wanted to talk about one last thing before we close today. You and your family, now that we've learned, have been in this space for neuro rehab for a long time, 80 years, you said, starting with your grandfather. Where do you see the future of sound and brain health going that's exciting to you?
We're there. It's interesting, and I've got ideas of what I see at the next step. But the fact, I remember, Collin and Ramona, you'll appreciate this. We have a colleague at Advanced Brain Technologies, Vera Brandis, and she was working with the Institute for Stress Research in Berlin, which had been the team that helped train Russian cosmonauts to optimize performance. And they had developed a predictive model of monitoring heart rate to then understand what the ideal music was to help regulate cardiac rhythms when you were in orbit. I mean, fascinating work.
Wow.
And they had developed the first wearable. It was called not a smartwatch, but a smart watch. This was 2001. We were together at the American Music Therapy Association conference in Washington, D.C., demoing the smartwatch, 2001, that took your heart rate, sent the data to your cardiologist, then your cardiologist knew what music to prescribe to you to regulate your heart rate at different times of the day. And I said, just imagine when we can have a real-time device that we can all wear where the music responds to our current state. We're there with Vital Neuro today. But the next evolution is now we not only take that neurological information, but we take the physiological data. So what is this combination of that data? And then further, based on our DNA, wow, how do we inform these protocols? So I think DNA-based programming of personalized music connected to real-time state is the future, and it's coming much faster than we can imagine.
That is so exciting. Well,
that's super cool.
Well, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today on Hello Brain, Alex. We really appreciate that. And thank you, everyone, for listening. If you have been enjoying listening to this show, we would love to hear from you. Please leave a review, drop a comment, and then share this with someone who you think might benefit, especially from music. I mean, if you just got to put something on and press play, there's no excuse anymore. So thanks
Alex,
so much for joining us.
Collin, before we close, Alex, can you share with us where somebody who's interested in learning more about your training programs might go, and if there's any additional information for them to know?
Yeah, advancedbrain.com. There's a D in there. So advancedbrain.com for the listening program, vitalneuro.com for Vital Neuro. And if you can pick up my book, it was published a few years ago, but it's still fantastic and relevant. Healing at the Speed of Sound, available in all formats at amazon.com. So that's a great starting point just to get the concept of the impact of sound, music, and silence in your life.
Love that.
Incredible. Thanks for sharing that. You heard that, y'all. That's where you go to get access to all these things. Another wonderful conversation. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Hello Brain, presented by Brainovation Network.